I watched my stepson's face turn to stone as the auctioneer brought down the gavel on Lot 47, a mahogany chest lined with tarnished velvet containing 14 pieces of his late mother's diamond jewelry. He had no idea the grey-haired woman in the back row, the one who just bought the entire collection for $28,000, was me, using cash he'd been forced to surrender 3 months earlier as court-ordered restitution for stealing my home. That same jewelry would sell privately for $130,000 within a week, every piece authenticated and appraised by a Naples gemologist who called it a once-in-a-decade find. And before the ink dried on the wire transfer, I'd already closed on a newer, better condo 2 doors down from the one he'd forged right out from under my name. He never recognized me, not for a second, not even when we stood 3 feet apart at the payment counter. That's the thing about quiet women who spent 40 years emptying bedpans, taking blood pressures in other people's kitchens, holding the hands of dying strangers while their own children forgot their phone numbers. We know how to show up invisible and leave with everything. My name is Evelyn Harlow, and I was 62 when my stepson Brett decided I was an easy mark. I'd worked as a home health aide in Pinellas County since I was 21, starting with no degree and a certification I earned at night school, while my first husband drank away every paycheck. After that marriage dissolved, I spent decades bouncing between small 1-bedroom rentals, tucking away 20s and 50s into a credit union savings account that Brett never knew existed because my late second husband, Tom, his father, taught me the value of quiet money. Tom was a structural engineer who read blueprints like novels and never said more than 3 sentences at a family dinner. He could look at a foundation crack and tell you the exact soil subsidence pattern that caused it, but he never once raised his voice in 30 years of marriage. He died 5 years before all this started, leaving me a modest life insurance payout and a stepson who called only when his car payment was late. I used that payout plus the savings I'd scraped together from changing wound dressings and reminding dementia patients to swallow their pills, money that smelled of rubbing alcohol and mint dental adhesive, to buy a ground-floor condo in a 40-plus community off Gulf de Bay Boulevard. $160,000, cash, no mortgage, no lien, no joint ownership. Just my name on a deed that I kept in a fireproof lockbox under my bed, next to a pair of support stockings I hadn't worn since my last patient passed. The day of Tom's funeral, I first learned what Brett was made of. The service ended at 11 in the morning at the Bayshore Cremation Society, a modest chapel with plastic palms and a ceiling fan that wobbled on every rotation. By 2 o'clock, Brett and his wife Marla were in Tom's study, going through file drawers with the kind of efficient smiling you'd expect from estate liquidators, not a grieving son. Marla had on a pale pink suit that probably cost more than the casket, and she kept patting my hand and saying, "Poor dear," while her eyes scanned the bookshelves for anything with resale value. She lifted a first-edition Hemingway and raised her eyebrows at Brett, who shook his head because the spine was cracked. I watched them from the hallway, a glass of unsweet tea sweating in my hand, and I felt something colder than grief settle in my stomach. Brett tossed a leather-bound journal onto a pile of junk destined for Goodwill, saying, "Dad's old fishing logs, who even keeps journals anymore?" The journal had a cracked spine and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco, and I'd seen Tom write in it every Sunday evening at the kitchen table while I prepped my patient schedule for the week. I waited until they left with 2 boxes of Tom's coin collection and a Waterford crystal decanter set. Then I retrieved that journal from the discard pile and sat alone in the darkening house. Inside the back cover in Tom's architectural block lettering was a single paragraph that made my stomach drop. It said, "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm gone and Brett is circling. Remember the Waterford deal? I caught him forging my signature on a consignment agreement 3 years ago. Never let him near your finances. He's a snake with a smile, and he will drain you dry if he thinks you're too soft to fight. Protect yourself like you protected all those patients." I pressed my fingers to my mouth and read it 3 times, then I hid the journal behind a loose baseboard in the hall closet and said nothing to anyone. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that sometimes the quiet people are the ones who keep the receipts. 5 years passed, and I barely thought about that warning. Brett and Marla showed up for occasional holiday dinners, always bringing the cheapest wine and the most expensive complaints about their credit card balances. Brett had become a licensed real estate agent in the state of Florida after a decade of failed ventures, a pressure washing business that never got off the ground, a short-lived attempt to sell timeshares in Cancun, and a brief stint as a notary public himself, which I should have remembered much earlier than I did. He talked constantly about the senior transition market, how many retirees were sitting on paid-off homes and didn't realize how much equity they could unlock. I'd listen and nod, never mentioning that my condo was fully mine, that I'd paid cash, that every appliance in that kitchen had been chosen with my own hands. Then my arthritis got worse, a combination of carpal tunnel from decades of lifting patients and the damp Florida humidity that seeped into every joint, and I made the mistake of saying at a Sunday potluck that I wished I could afford to update the kitchen cabinets and install impact windows before hurricane season. Brett's fork froze midair, and Marla's penciled eyebrows lifted in perfect choreography. I saw the calculation flash across their faces like numbers on a cash register. Within a week, they'd started what I now recognize as the love-bombing phase. Brett took me out to a waterfront restaurant on Clearwater Beach, the kind with cloth napkins and a wine list, and pitched the idea of a reverse mortgage. He leaned across the table, his smile so practiced it must have been rehearsed in front of a mirror, and slid a laminated brochure across the white linen. The brochure showed silver-haired couples on cruise ships and had a chart with arrows pointing up. "You've got nearly 200 grand in equity, Ev," he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial hush. "Let me handle the paperwork. You just sign where I say and you'll have 50,000 to renovate. No monthly payments, FHA insured, completely safe. It's what Dad would have wanted, you comfortable and taken care of." He invoked Tom like a magic word, and I felt my stomach twist because Tom had seen this exact moment coming 5 years before it happened. I smiled. I said it sounded like a lot of paperwork for an old lady, and I let him think I was a little foggy, a little too trusting. When Marla called the next day to say they'd prepared a power of attorney just in case, to make everything easier, I feigned confusion and delayed any signing by claiming I needed to think about it. I'd say things like, "Oh honey, I don't understand all these legal terms, let me ask my neighbor Sharon, she used to work at a title company." There was no Sharon. It was a stall tactic and it worked. Brett grew impatient, his voice tightening on the phone, and he started showing up at my door 3 times in 1 week, each time with a new form and a new story about how the lender needed things expedited. He once brought a manila envelope with a sticky note that said urgent in red marker, and I invited him in for lemonade and set the envelope on the counter unopened while I told him a long, rambling story about my hip surgery in 1998. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitch under his ear. I knew if I refused outright they'd find another way to pressure me, maybe even declare me incompetent. The system is not kind to older women living alone when a concerned family member starts whispering, so I played along. I gave them my best bewildered old woman smile and said, "Of course, honey, whatever you think is best." I never actually signed a single document, but I let them believe I had. I learned a long time ago from patients who'd been abused by their own children, let the predator think they're winning, and they'll get sloppy. Then came the day Marla said they couldn't bear for me to be alone during the construction. She arrived with a suitcase I hadn't packed, but their hands were too fast, and their smiles too wide to argue without tipping my hand. Before I knew it, my condo was emptied and locked, and I was moved into their guest bedroom in a cookie-cutter subdivision 12 miles inland. The house was in a development called Cypress Winds, where every third house had the same floor plan, and the HOA fined you if your grass grew above 2 inches. They told the contractor to start demolition on the kitchen while I was out, and suddenly I had no home to go back to. The smell of fresh drywall dust still clung to my memory of what had been my home. I unpacked a single suitcase, hung my floral nightgowns in their guest closet, set my blood pressure monitor on the nightstand, and acted grateful. "This is so kind of you," I told Marla, and I meant it with an irony they were too arrogant to detect. The whole time I was cataloguing every detail. The guest room had a door that locked from the inside, which I used every night. It also had a heating vent that carried sound from Brett's home office directly into my room, a quirk of low-quality ductwork that I discovered the first morning when I heard his phone ring so clearly I could make out the ringtone, a snippet of a country song about trucks and tailgates. The first night I lay awake until 2 a.m., still as a corpse, my ear against the painted metal of the vent listening. Brett placed 3 calls. The first was to a lender, his voice tense but buttered with the fake charm of someone who knows his commission depends on sounding calm. "I'm telling you, the reverse mortgage funded for 180, but the underwriter is flagging the occupancy certificate. She's starting to ask questions. No, she didn't sign the durable POA yet, but I've got the limited one she signed for the application. It's enough to get the deed transfer rolling. I just need you to push it through, we're almost there." I wrote down every word in a small spiral notebook I'd hidden inside the pillowcase. The second call was to a title company, asking if the closing date could be moved up. The third was too muffled to catch, but I heard Marla's voice in the background saying something about, "Make sure the old bat doesn't find out." That's when I knew the full scale of what he was doing. He'd already pulled equity from a home I'd never agreed to mortgage, and he was planning to sell it out from under me entirely. The next morning, I told Marla I felt a little dizzy and would rest. Once they left for broker's open house, I started my real work. 40 years as a home health aide teaches you to move through a house like a ghost. You learn where floorboards creak, how to turn a doorknob without a click, how to open a medicine cabinet without disturbing a sleeping patient. I pulled on a pair of cotton gloves I'd kept from a hospital supply closet years ago to avoid leaving fingerprints, and I crossed into Brett's office. The door had a cheap pin tumbler doorknob from Home Depot, a quickset that any halfway competent locksmith could pop in under a minute. Tom had taught me the basics of locksmithing back in the 90s when he took up the hobby. He said everyone should know how to get into their own house if the keys got lost, and he showed me with a practice lock mounted on a board in the garage. I'd kept the small set of picks and a tension wrench in my sewing kit ever since, wrapped in a piece of chamois that still smelled like his workshop. That morning I took them out, knelt in front of the office door and inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applying gentle clockwise pressure. The rake pick went in next, and I moved it in and out across the pins with a soft scrubbing motion. One pin set, then another, then the plug turned and the lock gave way with a quiet click. 38 seconds. I remember thinking that Brett's security was as half-hearted as his morality. Inside, the office smelled of stale coffee and the cloying vanilla scent of an air freshener plugged into the wall. A computer monitor glowed with a screensaver of a beach I was almost certain was stolen from a stock photo site. The filing cabinet in the corner was a 2-drawer lateral unit with a slide-out drawer that held hanging folders labeled client documents. I didn't need a pick for this one because the lock was the kind you could bypass with a straightened paper clip, but I had my picks and it took 10 seconds. In a folder marked Harlow E, I found the forged papers. There was a limited power of attorney document that I had supposedly signed, granting Brett authority to represent me in the reverse mortgage application. The signature looked like mine at a glance, but my signature has a distinctive loop on the lowercase y and the slant of the capital E, features that I've written 1,000 times on patient intake forms. This forgery was close, but the loop on the y was too circular, and the E was upright instead of slightly tilted left. More damning was the notary stamp. Every commissioned notary in Florida must use an embossed stamp or inked seal that includes their name, commission number, and expiration date. The stamp on this document purported to be from a notary named Patricia Mayhew. The embossed seal was slightly blurred at the edges, as if it had been photocopied or digitally reproduced rather than pressed into paper. Real embossing leaves a 3-dimensional impression you can feel. This was flat, a scan of a genuine stamp pasted onto the document. I photographed every page with my smartphone, making sure to capture the blurring and the signature discrepancies from multiple angles. Then I took out a burner phone I'd bought the week before at a prepaid kiosk inside a gas station on Gulf to Bay. I'd paid cash, a disposable Android with no contract, no SIM card registered to my name. I took a second set of photos on that phone for redundancy. I returned the documents exactly as I'd found them, closed the filing cabinet, relocked it, and relocked the office door, wiping the knob with a microfiber cloth. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. The woman who had held a patient's neck steady while a paramedic intubated them in a cramped bathroom was not going to panic over a filing cabinet. Over the next week, I pieced together everything while pretending to nap and shuffle around the house in a worn terracloth robe. During the day, I'd sit in the living room watching The Price is Right, keeping the volume loud enough to cover my eavesdropping, and Marla would take phone calls in the kitchen, pacing back and forth on the tile. I heard her order a new Louis Vuitton bag over the phone, describing the leather grade and the gold hardware with the precision of a surgeon. She told a friend that we're closing on a big property next month, and her tone was smug, like she was already spending the money. Brett's credit card statements arrived in the mail every Wednesday, and I retrieved them from the recycling bin on Thursday mornings before the garbage truck came. I used transparent tape to piece together shredded pages, a habit I'd developed while helping a former patient who had paranoid tendencies and shredded his own bills. The shredder in Brett's office was a cheap crosscut model that left strips long enough to reassemble. From those statements, I saw charges of $1,200 at a steakhouse on Gulf Boulevard, 4 figures at a luxury car customizer for what looked like custom rims on his leased Mercedes, and monthly minimum payments he was barely making. One statement had a cash advance of $8,000 taken just days before he approached me about the reverse mortgage, as if he was bridging a gap he fully intended to fill with my equity. They were bleeding money, and my condo was the tourniquet they planned to use. A critical piece fell into my lap when Marla's washing machine broke. It was a front-loading LG, maybe 4 years old, and she'd overloaded it with towels until the drain pump seized. The machine started beeping an error code, O, which stands for drain error, and Marla stood in front of it slapping the side like it was a misbehaving dog. She was on the verge of calling a repair service for $300 when I stepped in, still in my robe and slippers. In my years as a home health aide, I'd become the unofficial appliance whisperer for half my patients. You learn to unclog a dishwasher or replace a garbage disposal because calling maintenance can take hours, and a sick person needs clean linens. I'd fixed more washing machines than I could count, often for free, because a person on a fixed income can't always afford a service call. I pulled the washer away from the wall with surprising ease, unplugged it, removed the lower access panel with a Phillips screwdriver from the junk drawer, and drained the residual water into a shallow pan Marla provided. The pump filter was clogged with a wad of fabric softener sheet and a stray nickel. I dislodged the debris, checked the impeller, and reassembled the whole thing in 20 minutes. When I plugged it back in and started a test cycle, Marla stared at me like I'd performed open-heart surgery. Her eyes flicked from the functioning machine to my hands, which were raw-knuckled and steady, and something shifted in her expression. A flicker of unease. I just shrugged and said, "Old habits." That small moment shattered the image they'd constructed of me as a helpless old woman, and I saw something wary in Marla's eyes for the rest of the day. She stopped leaving me alone with her good crystal. That same night I heard Brett on a call in his office, his voice rising with panic. He didn't know the vent carried sound, and I'd taken to lying on the guest bed in the dark at 10 p.m., with my ear pressed to the metal grate like a teenager sneaking a radio signal. "What do you mean the notary's journal doesn't match?" he hissed. "The seal number checks out. I found her stamp from a public record. I don't care if she's retired, it's a notary stamp, it doesn't expire ethically." "Fix it." There was a long pause while the voice on the other end spoke, and then Brett said, "No, I can't have her come in and re-execute the document. She thinks she never signed anything. She's not that far gone yet, I can't risk it. Just find a way to backdate the journal entry. Patricia Mayhew won't complain, she's not exactly available for comment." The line went dead. I felt a chill run from my scalp to my toes. Patricia Mayhew, a notary who wasn't available for comment. That detail told me he had used a stamp from a notary who was deceased or incapacitated, likely lifting the image from an old document and fabricating a new seal digitally. I had the name now, Patricia Mayhew. The next morning, while Marla was at a nail appointment and Brett was at a showing, I used my burner phone to call the Florida Department of State's Notary Commissioning Office. I asked in a slightly trembling voice I'd perfected pretending to be a confused client, about a notary named Patricia Mayhew. The clerk was polite but cautious. After verifying that I wasn't asking for personal information about the notary, she confirmed that a Patricia Mayhew had been commissioned in Florida, but that her commission expired 9 years earlier, and that records indicated she had passed away 4 years prior. I thanked her and hung up, my mind clicking through the implications. Brett had found her stamp number on a public document, probably an old deed or affidavit, and then digitally fabricated a seal that appeared to be current. The actual notary who supposedly witnessed the power of attorney was in fact deceased. This was textbook notary fraud, a third-degree felony in Florida, and since it crossed state lines in the lending process, it fell under federal wire fraud statutes as well. I then remembered Tom's other safeguard, the one I hadn't thought about in years. Years earlier, after he caught Brett forging the Waterford consignment agreement, Tom set up a revocable living trust and placed all our major assets into it, including the condo after we bought it. The trust document had a provision that any sale or encumbrance of our primary residence required a video verification of me in person at the trust's administrative office with 2 trust officers present. Tom had called it his snakebite clause, and I'd rolled my eyes at the time, thinking he was paranoid. We'd laughed about it over dinner, him drawing little cartoon snakes on a napkin, me saying he watched too many true crime shows. I'd never changed the trust after he died, because the condo had been placed into it properly, and I never saw a reason to dissolve it. Brett, in his rush, must have assumed the deed was solely in my name, or that the trust was dissolved upon Tom's death. He was wrong. I called the trust company, Treasure Coast Trust and Fiduciary Services, from my burner phone while sitting in the guest bathroom with the fan running for white noise. I asked for a compliance officer, and a woman named MS Reeves came on the line. Her voice was calm and clipped, with the kind of measured authority that told me she'd dealt with fraudulent claims before. I explained carefully that I suspected my stepson had forged documents to fraudulently sell a property held in my trust. I gave her the address, the trust name, and my bearer certificates. She pulled up the account, and there was a long silence filled only by the click of a keyboard. Then she said, "Mrs. Harlow, there is a pending title transfer on that property that has not been matched with a video verification. The selling agent provided a power of attorney that purports to authorize the sale, but our verification protocol flagged it because the video requirement was not met. The funds from the reverse mortgage and the sale proceeds are currently frozen in escrow pending verification. This means the sale has not legally concluded. Your condo is still technically within your trust." I felt something surge in my chest, a cold, clean kind of relief that burned like ice water. He hadn't gotten away with it yet. The sale had been executed on paper, but because of Tom's snakebite clause, the title company's automated system had stopped the transfer at the trust's verification step. MS Reeves said she would need to escalate immediately to their legal department and possibly to law enforcement, as this involved potential federal wire fraud, elder exploitation, and notary fraud. Within 48 hours, she had looped in a U.S. postal inspector named Agent Michael Davies, who specialized in mail and wire fraud cases involving financial abuse of the elderly. I met him at a diner off Ulmerton Road, a place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in a steel drum. He was a tall man in a brown suit with a tie knotted so tightly it seemed like a tourniquet for his neck. His handshake was dry and brief. He listened without interruption while I laid out the evidence I'd gathered: photographs of the forged documents, the reassembled credit card statements, the recording of Brett's vent conversation about the notary's journal, and the details about Patricia Mayhew's death. He took notes on a yellow legal pad, his pen moving in short, efficient strokes. When I finished, he set the pen down and said, "Mrs. Harlow, what you've described meets the threshold for criminal investigation. To proceed, we need proof of intent, proof of forgery, and ideally a recorded admission. Do you feel safe returning to their house?" I told him I'd felt unsafe for weeks, but I wasn't leaving until I had what we needed. He then handed me a small device, a pen-shaped digital recorder with 256-level encryption, and a simple on/off switch disguised as the clip. "Keep this on your person at all times," he said. "If you can get him to state on tape that he forged the documents or that he knew the notary was invalid, we can move. Do not put yourself in unnecessary danger." I thanked him and slipped the pen into my purse, right next to the gnarled ball of rubber bands and paper clips I always carry, a habit from the days when I needed a spare tourniquet at a moment's notice. I needed to be sure, absolutely sure, that there was no shred of decency left in Brett before I took the final step. The federal case would be brutal, and a tiny, unwelcome part of me still remembered him as a gap-toothed 10-year-old who cried at his mother's funeral. I wanted to silence that part forever, so I staged the test. One morning after Marla left for a nail appointment and the house was quiet, I waited until Brett was at the kitchen table with his laptop open, crunching numbers on a spreadsheet I knew was the closing statement for my condo's fraudulent sale. I could see the reflection of the screen in the toaster. The total at the bottom read $220,000 net proceeds. I walked in, poured myself a glass of orange juice from the refrigerator, and then I let myself collapse. I didn't just stumble, I made it a full, real fall, dropping my weight hard onto the tile floor so the impact jarred my shoulder and my elbow struck the grout line. I jerked once, a spasmodic movement I'd seen 100 times in patients having a transient ischemic attack, and then I lay still with my eyes half-lidded, my breathing deliberately shallow and ragged. My arm flopped out across the tile, my palm open, fingers curled. The juice glass rolled under the cabinet. Brett kept typing for what felt like a full minute. I could hear the click of his trackpad, the whir of the laptop fan, and then the sound of his chair scraping back. He stood, walked toward me, and for one suspended second I thought he would kneel down and check my pulse, and that would have changed everything. But he didn't. He stepped over my outstretched hand, his loafer passing within an inch of my knuckles, and he walked to the counter to grab a manila folder. He glanced down at me, not with concern but with the flat, irritated certainty of someone being inconvenienced, and said, "Not now, old woman, I'm about to lose a deal." Then he stepped back over my leg and returned to his chair. I lay there, the cold tile pressing into my cheek, and I felt a profound stillness replace any last trace of familial sentiment. I counted to 20, then groaned, dragged myself upright using the counter edge, and mumbled something about low blood sugar. He didn't look up. That was the moment I knew I could destroy him without a twinge of guilt, and I would. 3 days later, Brett told me we had an appointment at the title company to finalize the renovation paperwork. He came downstairs that morning in a navy blue suit with a silk tie and a gold tie clip that I knew was Tom's, a piece Marla had probably lifted from the safe deposit box. Marla wore pearls and a silk blouse, as if they were going to a charity gala instead of what they thought would be the final fleecing of an old woman. I dressed in my usual floral blouse, a polyester cardigan, and my sensible SAS shoes. I put the recorder pen in my front pocket, the lump no larger than a tube of lip balm. On the drive, Brett kept up a running monologue about how grateful I should be, how he'd pulled strings with the lender to get the best rate, how this was a new chapter for me. His voice was a steady stream of self-congratulation, and Marla kept adjusting her pearl necklace in the visor mirror. I let him dig his own grave. As we pulled into the parking lot of the title agency, a strip mall suite with tinted windows, I said, "Brett, I appreciate so much what you've done. I just have one question about the reverse mortgage. That notary that came to the house, that lady with the blue folder, she was so nice. What was her name again?" He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and I saw the microsecond of calculation before he answered. "Oh yeah, Patricia Mayhew, she's the best, completely by the book. I've worked with her for years." I smiled and nodded. Patricia Mayhew had been dead for 4 years. Brett had just admitted on a digital recording, with date and timestamps, that he had used a notary he knew was either deceased or falsely represented. That was enough. At the title office, a sterile room with a long conference table and a water cooler that glugged intermittently, Brett spread out documents like a seasoned professional. A final settlement statement for the sale of my condo, net proceeds of $220,000, a seller signature line where my name was already typed, and an acknowledgement of the reverse mortgage payoff. A notary, a nervous young woman with a fresh-inked seal and a state-issued journal, sat in the corner. She'd been told I was just a frail old woman who needed a witness, and her expression was blank and accommodating. I sat down at the head of the table, folded my hands and looked at the title agent, a young man in a shiny tie who smelled of nervous sweat and cologne that fought to a drawer. Brett slid a pen toward me. "Just sign there, Ev, and we're all done. You'll have your renovation money by the end of the week." I picked up the pen, a cheap ballpoint with the title company's logo, and I set it back down. I looked directly into Brett's eyes, and I let my voice drop into the calm, steady tone I used to use with combative patients who were about to learn a hard truth about their medication. "I'm not signing anything for a man who'd step over a dying woman to save his commission." The room went so silent I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, a loud, industrial thing with a second hand that jerked forward every second. Brett's grin flickered, a nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth. "What are you talking about? Ev, you're confused. Maybe we should reschedule." He started gathering the papers, but I put my hand flat on the stack and held them down. "I'm not confused," I said. "I'm the clearest I've been in years." I pulled the recorder pen from my pocket and held it up so the tiny red light was visible. "You just admitted to using a notary who's been dead for 4 years. You admitted to taking out a reverse mortgage on my condo without my signature. You forged a power of attorney and a consent to sell, and I have every page of the forged documents photographed. I've been listening to you through the air vent every night for weeks. I know about the credit card cash advance, the custom rims, the title company you bullied into bypassing the trust's video verification. And I know what you said when your wife asked if the old bat would find out." I let the silence stretch, watching his face go through stages like a stop-motion film, confusion, disbelief, rising panic, and then a kind of desperate, cornered fury. Before he could speak, the door to the conference room opened. Agent Davies walked in, his brown suit immaculate, and behind him were 2 uniformed officers from the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office and MS Reeves from Treasure Coast Trust, carrying a binder with the original trust documents and a copy of the snakebite clause highlighted in yellow. Davies spoke first, his voice flat and procedural. "Brett Harlow, you are under arrest for elder exploitation, wire fraud, forgery, and unauthorized use of a notary stamp. You have the right to remain silent." Brett's face collapsed completely, the mask of the smooth real estate agent shattering to reveal a panicked, red-faced man who lunged for the stack of documents as if he could swallow the evidence. The officers restrained him easily, one hand on each arm. Marla started screaming that I was senile, that I'd confused everything, that the documents were legitimate, but her voice was shrill, and her pearls clacked against the table when she slammed her hand down. The notary looked like she wanted to crawl under her chair. Ms. Reeves calmly informed the arresting officers that the trust account had been frozen and all pending transfers voided. The title agent, poor young man, stood with his mouth open, his shiny tie catching the fluorescent light like a distress beacon. As Brett was led out in handcuffs, he twisted his head to look back at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in his face before, genuine, unvarnished fear. He'd always thought I was a soft mark. He never considered that the quiet woman in the floral blouse had spent 40 years outmaneuvering death in small, everyday battles, and that she'd been paying attention. Brett Harlow was charged with 7 counts including forgery, elder exploitation, wire fraud, and unauthorized use of a notary stamp. His real estate license was suspended within 48 hours by the Florida Real Estate Commission. At the formal hearing 2 months later, I testified via video link, walking the board through every forged document, every lie, every penny of debt he'd tried to bury me under. The board also reviewed the evidence I'd submitted independently, including the reassembled credit card statements, the notary fraud trail I'd rebuilt by calling the Department of State, and Agent Davies's affidavit confirming the recording. They revoked Brett's license permanently, with no option to reapply, and entered a lifetime ban from any licensed profession in the state that requires fiduciary responsibility. The criminal trial was swift because the evidence was overwhelming. The recording alone, combined with the forensic analysis showing the notary seal was a digital fabrication, left his public defender with little to do except try to plea bargain. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison at the Avon Park Correctional Institution, and Marla took a plea deal for 18 months for her role in the conspiracy and financial facilitation. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Carruthers, who had seen more than her share of elder fraud cases, looked over her glasses and said, "This was not a crime of desperation. This was a calculated, predatory scheme against a vulnerable family member who trusted you." I felt a small, fierce pride that I had never been vulnerable, not really, but I understood the legal necessity of the language. The court ordered full restitution, the $180,000 of reverse mortgage equity he drained, plus all accrued interest and my legal fees. The trust company, exercising its snakebite clause, voided the sale entirely and returned the title to me clean. The fraudulent buyer, an investment group that had been working with Brett, sued him for failure to deliver clear title, adding to his civil liabilities. But the damages he still owed exceeded his immediate ability to pay, so the court ordered liquidation of his personal assets. Brett's late mother, Elaine, had left him a collection of vintage diamond jewelry, 14 pieces including a 3-carat old European solitaire ring, a tennis bracelet with VVS clarity stones, and a secure clasp, a pair of Art Deco drop earrings with delicate filigree work, and several brooches and pendants. He'd kept them in a safety deposit box at a local branch of Sun Coast Federal Credit Union. The sheriff's office seized the contents of the box and scheduled a public auction to satisfy the restitution order. I learned about it through the victim notification system, which sent me a photocopied auction catalog. The listing described, Lot 47, one mahogany jewelry chest containing 14 vintage diamond items, estimated value not less than $45,000 liquidated. I have spent my life surrounded by small print, discharge instructions, medication labels, insurance forms, and I know how to read a catalog like a threat assessment. I studied those pieces for days. I cross-referenced the descriptions with online GIA certificates when I could find matches, and I contacted a former patient's granddaughter who worked in estate jewelry to get a sense of retail after refurbishment. The melt value of the diamonds alone, based on carat weight and clarity, was around $60,000, but as complete vintage pieces in excellent condition, the collection could fetch significantly more to a private buyer who understood provenance. I arranged a cashier's check for $30,000 from my personal savings, an account untouched by Brett because he never knew it existed. I drove to the auction house, a low building with a gravel lot out by the interstate, wearing a grey barb wig I'd ordered from a medical supply site, and a pair of oversized bifocals with clear glass lenses that made my face look narrower and older. I sat in the very last row, next to a plastic fern, and I waited. Brett was there, permitted to attend under supervision because the auction was a civil proceeding, sitting rigidly with a woman I didn't recognize, maybe a paralegal or the last person willing to associate with him. His hair had gone greyer in the month since the arrest, and his suit was the same navy one he'd worn to the title office, now slightly too big because he'd lost weight in county lockup. He kept looking around the room, his head swiveling anxiously, hoping someone would bid the lot up high so he could reduce what he owed and maybe keep some scraps. When lot 47 came up, the auctioneer described it in a rapid monotone, the gavel hovering. I waded through the opening bids, 5,000, 8,000, 12,000, and then a phone bidder joined at 15. I let them climb, letting Brett feel a flutter of hope. At 20,000 the phone bidder countered, and I raised my paddle calmly, a numbered slip of card for 22. The phone bidder went to 25. I went to 27. The auctioneer's chant grew rhythmic, trying to coax another increment, and the phone bidder offered 28. I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to see Brett's shoulders relax infinitesimally, and then I raised my paddle with a deliberate, slow motion and nodded. 28,000 going once, going twice, sold to paddle 32. The gavel fell with a crack. I walked to the payment desk, handed over the cashier's check made out to the county auction house, and collected the mahogany chest under the name Margaret Little, a name I'd chosen from a distant cousin who died in the 60s and who had no living relatives to confuse the record. Brett passed within 3 feet of me on his way out, and his eyes slid over my wig and glasses without a single flicker of recognition. The quiet woman in the back row once again was invisible. The following week, I took the chest to an estate jewelry specialist in Naples, recommended by M.S. Reeves, who knew trustworthy dealers through the trust company's high-net-worth clients. The dealer was a Frenchwoman named Celeste, whose sharp smelled of museum leather and furniture polish. She examined each piece under a loupe, a spectrometer, and a microscope, clicking her tongue in appreciation. The solitaire was an old European cut with a cullet you could see through the table, a hand-cut stone from the 1920s that predated modern brilliant cuts and had a warmer, more romantic fire. The tennis bracelet had 37 natural F-color stones with no visible inclusions under 10x magnification, matched perfectly, set in platinum with a safety clasp that still functioned. The Art Deco earrings were unsigned, but likely from a Parisian atelier, with a distinct geometric filigree that matched design books from 1925. There were also a diamond-encrusted cocktail watch, a pair of Marquise-cut studs, and an Edwardian pendant with mill-grain detailing. Celeste took a week to gather comparable sales and interest from her private buyers, then offered me $130,000 for the entire collection, wired directly to my account. I accepted, and the funds cleared before I'd finished my second cup of coffee the next morning. That money, combined with the restored proceeds from the voided sale and the restitution payments, gave me just over $300,000 in total. I could have moved anywhere, a beachside cottage in Nova Scotia, a casita in New Mexico, anywhere far from the humidity and the memories, but I chose to stay in the same 40-plus community off Gulf to Bay. A corner unit had come on the market 2 doors down from my original condo, a second-floor unit with an updated kitchen, impact glass on every window, a lake view from the screened lanai, and a master bath with a walk-in tub I'd never have to pay a contractor to install. I bought it outright for $215,000, and I had the closing lawyer walk me into the building the day after recording. I walked the same sidewalk I'd walked 100 times before, past my old condo where the front door was now painted a different color, and a family of strangers lived in the space that had been mine. I didn't stop. I didn't look through the window. I just unlocked my new door with a key still warm from the closing attorney's hand, stepped onto my new ceramic tile floor, and rested my purse on a quartz counter that no one could ever take from me again. The first thing I did was hang Tom's old fishing log in a shadow box on the wall next to the refrigerator, open to the page with his warning. The second thing I did was frame the auction receipt and put it in the bathroom, so every morning when I brushed my teeth, I'd remember that sometimes the quiet ones come out on top. Tom's warning saved me, but it was the long years of small, patient work that gave me the tools to use it. The calluses on my fingers from changing sheets and fixing washing machines, the habit of listening more than speaking, the ability to read a credit card statement or a notary seal with the same careful attention I'd used to read a medication label for a patient who couldn't read it themselves. I learned that integrity isn't a passive virtue handed down in a will. It's a skill you build every day by watching people who mistake your quietness for weakness until you're the only one standing in a room full of receipts. My stepson sits in a cell now, and every month the prison accounting system sends me a direct deposit of $27.14 toward the remaining restitution balance, a number so small it's almost insulting. but I track it on a spreadsheet with the same precision he once used to drain my equity. Some legacies are quieter than others, but they last a whole lot longer. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life accounts where the quiet ones come out on top. I'll see you in the next one.